All right, welcome everyone to the first class where you are starting the weaving. So we need a couple things. We need the loom strung with our warp strings that are the vertical strings. We need a needle, okay? And then we have our piece of yarn, and this should be your wingspan. So if you make a T with your arms, this piece of yarn should go from the fingertips on the left side all the way across to the right side. You don't want to grab more than that. Can you grab less than that? Yes, but don't grab more than that. With this, we have yarn which is made out of multiple fibers that are braided or twisted together. And so our tip of our yarn usually becomes frayed the more and more we use it or touch it or play with it. And so we don't want to take the needle and try to string that through, okay, because we're either going to strip it and unwind it all, which would be really bad, or it's just going to waste a lot of time trying to get that through. So you go back a little ways, you grab it, and what you do is you create a loop, okay? So you have a short end and a long end. You have this loop. Now, if we hold it all the way back here, we still don't have any control. So we bring our fingers closer to that tip of that loop, and now we go back and forth, wiggling it through, okay? So we have our loop that we put through the eye of the needle, and now we are going to pull on just the short end until the short end is out. Okay. Now I like to tie a knot, so I take the short end, I put it over the top of the long piece of yarn, or the long end, and then your needle has to be in this circle. Okay, if it's in the circle like it is, attached to that piece of yarn, then I grab here on the long and I'm gonna put the short underneath and through the circle. Now I grab here and I grab the long and I pull, right? Now I can always shorten the short end. I can make it even smaller, but sometimes when I pull, it's too tight and it won't let me do that. So I can pull on the short end and then pull back on the long end. And sometimes I have to do it multiple times. This is kind of a thicker yarn, so it tends to have tighter knots. I like to keep mine short, my little tail, my short end here short. Some of you will keep it longer. I just don't like to worry about it getting woven in to my loom. All right, so now I have moved this across or in front, and now we bring our loom up close. So I always start at the bottom, the part that's closest to me. And I like to weave with my left hand more than my right. So I start on the left side. It doesn't matter what side you start on, all right? And it doesn't matter if you go underneath or if you go over. What does matter, we'll zoom in here. Okay, so I'm starting underneath. So that means that my next one I have to go over. Okay, then I go under, then I go over, under, over, and we just continue that pattern all the way across. Okay, now I have all this other yarn that I need to pull, okay, and I'm going to zoom back out because when I'm pulling, I don't want to pull on the needle. I don't want to hold the needle and pull. I want to come right here and pull slowly. Okay, if I have this big kind of crazy ball that's starting there, I want to loosen that up. And I'm pulling until I get close to the end, right? Then I like to kind of bring it down close to the bottom, and I'm going to pull until I have barely any left okay, like that. All right, now I'm going to zoom back in. Sorry for going in and out, in and out, in and out, but it's really important. So we ended underneath the white warp string. So we are underneath it right here. So that means that the only way that it's going to get wrapped around this is if we start our next row by doing the opposite. So if we end underneath, now we're going to go over the top of this one. If we go over this one, that means we're going to go under the next one. So under, over, under, over. And if you look, it should be the opposite of what you did the time before. So you'll notice we ended under, and right before the last one, we were over. Now we're under, and this one was over. Okay, so we want the opposite of what we did the time before. All right, so now I'm pulling on the needle until I get to here. And now I'm pulling, zoom out. Now I am pulling on the yarn on the other side. Okay, now this is really important. I have this loop, okay? I am going to watch this loop. And once it gets close, I want to push everything down. And now I'm going to watch it. Once it touches the warp string, I'm going to stop pulling. Okay, I do not want this warp string to start pulling in. I don't want to pull that tight. So I stop right there. Okay, if I look, the warp string is still straight. That tells me it's good. I also don't want it to be super loose. All right, we don't want a warp or a loop at the end. So we're pulling it until that loop goes away and is barely pulling or touching this warp string. All right. So now we ended over the top of this warp string. So now I'm going to go around it, meaning if I ended over the top, now I start my next one by going underneath. So under, over, under, over. And when you start, usually your first couple here, you gotta constantly lift up. So I'm using both hands, which is another reason we as art teachers love this project. Got to use both hands if you can. All right. So I'm pulling, pulling, pulling. Now I'm watching that loop. Push it down once it gets close. Again, watching that loop. I'm pulling. And once it touches, I look. Is this still straight? Yep. Do I have a loop out? Nope. I'm good. And voila. So now I'm going to constantly just keep going, keep going, keep going until I get to the end. And I'll have another video that shows you that. I do want to show you one thing that if you're not watching what you're doing, right? So I'm under, I go over. So now I go under this one, under, over, under, over. Watching that loop. Okay, so I did that one right. Let's say I don't watch though, and I ended over the top. I ended over. If I start the next row going over, this will mean that every single thing is exactly the same as the row before. It's not the opposite, it's the same. I will show you what happens. When you are pulling this and you get close to the end, you're watching this loop. You're watching the loop up, but it never wraps around this because it ended on the top and I started on the top. So it never wrapped around that last warp string. So now everything you just did is erased. Okay. You have to be careful of that. And that's why it's so important to say, right, I ended underneath. Now I have to figure out how is it going to wrap around that warp string. And the only way it can do that is if I do the opposite of how I ended. So if I ended under, now I need to go and start by going over. So now I'm over this warp string and I go under the next one. Okay, if you don't do that, you will constantly just erase until you don't have anything on there. All right, good luck. I will have the next video and I'll show you how you end when you get close to the end. All right, thanks.